Hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining and coming to Day of Open Source. Uh, I, if you have joined us already, drop a hey in the comment section. I can see a lot of people here. Hello, hi everyone. So I think we can begin with the session, and this is, as the name suggests, Days of Open Source. We'll be going from Git to GitHub and industry standards, and we'll be even going around the concept of the future scope of open source. And obviously, considering it is the month of October, we'll be definitely landing basically on Hacktoberfest and how you all can contribute to it and be a part of the open source community, right? So I think if I go and mention about the itinerary of the day, we have Sir Rajat Gulati, co-founder of Pluto's One. Then there is a session of hands-on with Git and GitHub on how you can make your first PR happen. Then we have Shivai Lamba coming for future avenues and opportunities in open source with the texture of communities, right? And I think with that, I would like to start, and I welcome Sir Rajat Gulati, co-founder at Pluto's One. And welcome, sir. How are you?
Hi, Nirupama. I'm very well. Thank you for having me.
It's good to have you, sir. So it's about Open Source Day, and you'll be opening, starting the event, and probably enlightening a lot of them on how open source. You can give us lights on the industry standards. So I think I'll give it over to you, and we can continue.
Thank you very much. Now, I am new to the event, so I'm not exactly sure how much you guys are familiar with open source. So I'm going to sort of cater to the absolute beginners here and hope that there's also something insightful for some of the more experienced members of the audience. Right. So a little bit about myself. I'm a co-founder at Plutus One, as Nirupama mentioned. We're a free to use digital platform for banks to offer all manner of fintech services to their consumers. And we essentially make available facilities like payments, digital payments, e-commerce, etc., to bank customers. Right. So that's what we do. Previously, I've been the group CEO at a consulting firm in India called Droga Group. I've also been the product head at a large edtech firm called Merit Nation. And I started my career with Castrol right after an MBA from IIM Ahmedabad. And I'm a computer science engineer by training. At Plutus One, I am in charge of product and technology. So those are two verticals that I handle. And hopefully that gives me some insight into open source, how we use it, and how I recommend that a lot of other people use it as well. Right. So I think the tough thing comes when you try and sort of define what open source is, because there are two schools of thought as to what open source is. I think where they agree broadly, open source is software that's provided with its own code, right? The source code is available to you, and you're free to use and modify it as you wish. So that's, I think, where they agree. There are deeper divisions within this, whether you're referring to Richard Stallman's definition of free software or you're referring to the OSI definition of open source. These are a little bit different, but it's useful to understand where this comes from, what the history of software development has been, and why there exists now a category of software called open source software. So, how this started is for as long as there have been computers, there have been programmers for computers. When we could do some level of high level programming, that is, that we could use English words and terminology in pre-compilation, most of the programmers tended to be academics because they were studying some of the other field where computers were necessary. Now, academics like to minimize the effort that they put in, as does everybody else. So they wanted to reuse a lot of the code that the other academics created. And in the 50s through the 60s, 1950s through the 60s, that was the general trend that they would reuse their code. By 1970s and 80s, as personal computers gained in proliferation, a lot of corporations emerged whose business model was to monetize the software that went with these personal computers, whether it went to individual users or to corporate clients. So And it made no sense for them to release the source code because then other users would have access to the software. They could compile it themselves, they could run it themselves. So they wanted only people who paid for the software to be able to use it. So you saw a lot of closed software being released. This is proprietary software where the code is not released along with the software. Now, in opposition to this, so what a lot of academics were continuing to do was build under open source, and you could see a couple of trends emerge as they saw the effects of closed software versus open software. And one of them was that a lot of innovation was not happening under closed. So definitely new business models were coming in and new problems were being solved, but the rate at which new problems were being solved, or the rate at which the smaller problems that individual users, smaller corporations had, those were not being solved by their software because it was not economically feasible for a developer to solve these problems for them if all they were getting paid for was the software license. You would There'd be a release in 1971, and then there'd be the next release in 1973, and there was no incentive for the developer to release incremental releases between these periods. So uh, as a result, the open source software foundation was finally so the free software foundation first was formed in 83 when Richard Stallman, who's considered the father of free software, at least this is within open source, said that all software development should be open. And the philosophy behind this is they say that free software is free in terms of speech, as free speech, and not free beer. What that means is, let's understand the philosophy a little bit. It's not about whether you're paying a price for the software or not, right? Open source doesn't actually stop you from claiming a sticker price for the software that you give out, you develop. What it says is that if you've put in effort into developing software, that software should now work for the benefit of not just end users, but also other developers. Now, this is the big deal in the open software community. Open software developers tend to view their users as co-developers. So if I am the end user of a software and I see that there is a problem with the software, there is a particular driver that's missing, there's a particular bug in one of the features, I am not just a user now. I am someone who's reporting the bug. I am causing an improvement to happen in the software, whether or not I write the own code. So again, open licensing, for example, which is the model that is used here, is not just for software. There are open textbooks, so they call it the open publishing license. There is open media, so Wikimedia, which runs Wikipedia, is one of those arrangements where they use an open licensing for content, right? So it's not just about code and software, but code at the end of the day is content. So anyone who reports a bug is essentially now a code developer. The philosophy behind open source is to now take all your users and count them as co-developers and harness their efforts in the improvement of the software that someone came up with. So how does software start? Software starts because some smart person, some development capable person, one individual usually, is trying to solve their own personal problem. They solve that problem by writing a particular piece of code. If you only keep it with yourself, you don't even know if you only solved one person's problem, and you don't even know whether there's a requirement for this out there. But if you open this code up to other people, then you suddenly made it available. There are two ways of doing this. One, that you could say, I've created a solution for a particular problem. I am willing to sell this to you for X amount of money, and you can therefore use this. And that is what closed software does. The other way is to say that I have solved a particular problem on my own. I don't know whether other people have this problem or not. And maybe people have problems that are 90% related to the problem I'm facing, but I'm willing to give this out to you to see what you want to do with the code that I've created, and you give it out as code. So it's not just the final software, but it's the code as well. So people can now look at that code, see, okay, this is the problem that he's trying to solve. My problem is either the same, so I'll use the same software, or my problem is slightly different. Maybe I need to tweak this code just a little bit to be able to solve my particular problem. And what they've done now is create another piece of software, an iteration, a version of your software that does something a little bit different from what you tried to do. But now you've got the same core and a little more functionality, which you wouldn't have drawn up yourself if you were the first developer, because you didn't realize that was a need. Now, if I extend this argument infinitely, it means that software could solve the problems for a finitely large number of people as long as you opened it up to them. And that's the philosophy behind open source, which is not to say that open source is the only way to go. And it's also not to say that open source doesn't have any problems of its own. Theoretically, open source software should resolve bugs very quickly. It doesn't mean that there are no bugs in open source software. But there is a saying by one of the founders of the open source movement. In fact, one of the founders of OSI, called Eric Raymond. And if anybody's interested, I would really recommend a book, a lecture, and then a book that he wrote called The Cathedral and the Bazaar, which explained the philosophical differences between closed source software and open source software and how software development should be done. And he said, Eric Raymond said that with enough eyeballs, all bugs are shallow. What that means is if something was majorly broken and there were only one developer working on the system, it would take time for them to recognize the error and fix it. But if there are a large number of people looking at the code, looking at the software, then chances are that someone will catch it before it becomes a major issue. Therefore, all bugs are shallow. That means they are mostly minor fixes. Major breakages in open source software tend to be very, very infrequent. What does that result in? There are people who believe that the internet of today is possible only because a bunch of open source software was available to people, right? So what we call the internet today, it started out as a DARPANET, and then was opened up to academics. There mostly academics working on it in the first place. But if it weren't free for them to access, if it weren't free for them to develop software on, it wouldn't have extended to everybody on the planet. And we are at a point today where we say that internet access is a fundamental human right, right? That democratization has been possible in large part. Some say only due to, but in large part because the foundations of the technology that powers the internet today, they were all open source. They were available for people to look at, to improve. You couldn't be running a billion IP addresses today on software that was buggy, that people hadn't looked at and that they couldn't trust, right? Um, in fact, to talk about, I'll come back to trust, but consider that what we're trying to democratize trust through, which are your blockchain protocols and the tokens thereof, Bitcoin and Ethereum are both open source projects. Because if you want people and systems to be able to trust other systems, to be able to trust software, to be able to trust software systems, then they need to be able to examine it for themselves and make sure that there is nothing in there that is counter to their own interests. I don't want to be using software that is spying on me for the benefit of a corporation. Therefore, I want to be using software that has been looked at by 1,000, ideally 1,000,000 people who are qualified to judge that software, to evaluate that software. And that's what open source is about, right? Think about the kind of software that you use. I guarantee you're using open source in at scale right now. The world's most popular browser, Chrome, is built at the back of an open source engine called Chromium. So whether you're using Microsoft Edge, whether you're using Chrome, or whether you're using, as I do, the Brave browser, they're all built on top of Chromium. Brave in itself is open source as well. But Edge is not open source and Chrome is not open source, but they're built on top of a layer of open source. So open source, in fact, you'll see a lot of companies engage with open source even if they sell software for money, because open source lays the foundations for a lot of what they can do. If I'm a company today, and some of the biggest companies in the world, this is true, I want to create a platform that's very robust, then I will open source at least part of the code for that platform so that other people can work on it. People that I don't pay right now, that I can't afford, for example, can work on that system. Now, why would they want to work on that system? So the open source market is two-sided, and this is where the incentives for developers come. Why would an individual developer want to work on an open source platform? There are multiple reasons. Let's look at them from the eyes of a beginner developer. Now, if you're getting into development today, then there are three parts to development, very broadly speaking, and there are different ways to cut it. So I'll understand if you disagree with me. One is about understanding algorithms and processes for problem solving, right? and that stays common irrespective of the platform that you work in, whether it's C, Python, Ruby, it doesn't matter. Irrespective of the platform you work in, you need to be able to problem solve to be a developer. That's one. And that's the most abstract level of thinking. The next level is, suppose you were working as a single developer and you were working on your local machine. Then the next skill you would need is the knowledge of a language, and ideally an IDE, right? Or an integrated development environment. You have to know where to code. That's great. But the third thing, and this is often the difference between, so as an organization, when I hire, we find that this is the starkest difference between people with to maybe a year, no experience to maybe a year of experience, and people with significantly more experience, is that working in a production environment actually familiarizes you with a set of tools and processes that are common to software development within the environment. And what that means is, as a developer, if you need to know how to use Git, because if you're not the only developer and then you need to share your code with somebody, even if it's proprietary code, you need to be able to share it with somebody. So some level of version control needs to happen, whether you use Git or something else, right? If it's going to be a bigger project, then someone is in charge of actually merging that code with the main branch. So there's going to be a GitHub there as well, right? Somewhere where you can host your code, and then you can run Git on top of it. And then there is good software development practices about how you write your code, how you document your code, how you so how you maintain your code. And those things are skills that a lot of new engineers, new developers don't actually learn, because back in college, at least, right, during their engineering degrees, or when they first learn to code. Where do you learn these best practices from? You learn them from other developers. Now, as an individual contributor, where do you actually meet other developers? The best space to do that is in large collaborative environments like open source platforms, right? So Linux, for example, is the world's largest open source software in the world, right? Where are Linux? Anybody can contribute to Linux. Now, there may only be, so Linux will be the one who pushes commits to the final Linux kernels, but everything around that, whether it's in the X Windows system, whether it's in a Windows manager, whether it's in a file system, anyone is free to contribute to their code to all of to any of those projects. And if you walk into an open source project today, say on GitHub, and Nirupama will actually take you through that process as well. But if you walk into an open source project for the first time, the only thing that you've ever done is code on your local machine, and you walk into an open source project on GitHub, you will actually find that most open source projects are organized in a way that show newcomers where to start, what to do, and how they can contribute. So they're usually tagged with good for first timers. There are these tags that tell you, okay, come in here. And going back to that Eric Raymond quote that all bugs are shallow with enough eyeballs, right? There will be a lot of bugs listed there that you can look at and say, just have a look at this, see what you can improve here, see if you can find a flaw. And it's not that nobody has looked at them. It's that there is, I mean, so bugs grow with software exponentially as lines of codes grow. So you're going to have the opportunity to do some minor fixes. Maybe a printf statement is wrong. Maybe the comments are wrong, if it's just that simple. But it's a good way to find other people who are doing work well and learn from their behaviors, whether how they tabulate their code, indent their code, whether how they document their code, whether how they think of a particular loop system within when you move from pseudocode to actual code. This is an optimal way of doing it, not just in terms of how quick it is computationally, but how easy it is to explain to the next user who needs to maintain your code, right? So those are all good practices that are best picked up working on open source platforms. Now, so it's great learning. There is from a learning perspective, it is open source projects are incomparable. The other thing to learn from this is that it's laddered. Now, there are a lot of people who got into that project ahead of you, some with the same level of skill, some with less, some with more. But what they've done is, because they know that a lot of people are going to be working on these projects, these the challenges within these projects are also often laddered. So, like I said, there'll be an entry point for you to say, okay, this is a good place for you to start. But then there'll be other flags, other tags put in there to say, okay, after you've done the first sort of challenge, look at this one, and then look at this one, and they'll handhold you for some period of time as you introduce yourself here. Do this across a breadth of open source projects, and you've essentially worked without reporting to an office. You've actually worked in a large scale production environment. Most offices can't match open source projects at the scale at which they operate. Again, it's important to remember that I'm not implying that open source software is the only way to go about it. But as a systems engineer, right, as someone personally who I like to think of in terms of global maximas, mathematically speaking, I think the larger the project, the more democratic it is, the more people it can reach, the greater the optimization that you can find in the code that you write. The better that you will solve problems, and the better you will solve problems for everybody. Now, without naming names, if a particular corporation starts working on a big project, we've seen this happen in the past. You start complaining about bloatware, right? Features creep in that you don't need to see, that most users don't need to see. Then open source software, but they have, say, three big clients that pay for those features particularly. They're going to keep those features in that software. In open source, those might get forked into a smaller branch, and you can then maintain two different projects. And you see this all the time, say with Linux development. So personally, for example, I'm a completely free open source software user. My all my laptops at home are all Linux. Even my MacBook Pros run Linux. I don't run Mac OS on anything. My The only other computers I have at home are two Raspberry Pis. One which is using Raspbian, and the other one uses Pi-hole as a ad blocking network monitor. Right. So when I use these systems, I need to know that enough number of people have looked at these platforms and fixed stuff. And the Linux distribution, so my main daily driver is a distro called Manjaro, which started out as a fork of Arch. Now, when I got into Linux, I wasn't savvy enough about using Linux to be able to use what was a very tech focused distro like Arch. But what I liked about Arch, that it was a rolling release. That means the minute that an update is added to the stable branch of the distro, it is rolled out to every user. I love that. It makes me think that this software is going to be most up to date. It's going to be most secure. Any threats that are identified on the net have been resolved as quickly as possible. But Arch was not accessible to me. It didn't have a graphical installer. It didn't have a lot of sorry, give me a second. It didn't have a graphical installer. It was most of the commands you need to know. You need to be able to run them in the command line. And so, but then I went looking around for what would be a good fork of Arch that I could use. I found Manjaro, which I found to be super user friendly, and I've been using Manjaro for going on 10 years now. And that's my software. That's my Linux driver of choice. Now, this choice is what open source is all about from the user perspective. And from the developer's perspective, the last two benefits that I would like to leave with you is one, that you would have worked with some of the best minds in the world. Developers from Microsoft, Google, individual developers, Linux towards, they are all working on the platforms that you can go work on, and you can learn from them, but you can also then claim to say a future employer or a future collaborator that you worked on these platforms. And in fact, when we hire, we often look to people's GitHub repositories to see which projects they are part of, how frequently they make pull requests, and how they comment their code, how they document their code. Those are the three criteria that we use to shortlist candidates for their interviews, their technical interviews. So if those three criteria are not met well, we don't even bother, because we know that this person doesn't have either doesn't have production grade experience, or doesn't have the desire to actually go beyond a particular point in software development. So those are good signals to give to future employers, collaborators, that I have ambition and I have practice in code at enterprise scale. Open source software are usually enterprise scale. Although to be fair, the median number of users on most open source software is still about 5.1. So a lot of them are just individual submissions on GitHub that have never been updated. But the average project tends to involve hundreds of people. right? So the ones that you can pick up. Um, and the last benefit I think as a developer is one of personal satisfaction, which is that the minute one of your pull requests is approved and there's a final commit done on one of the contributions that you've made, even if it's just a comment, your change, your contribution is now in front of the millions of developers and users of that software across the globe. So, I mean, that's a great sort of feeling of reward, I would think, as a developer. Now, if you are not a hardcore developer and you're just a consumer, now, what are the advantages of open source software? I think one, and this sort of confuses a lot of people, a lot of open source software is free, but those two things are not interchangeable. But because it's free, the upfront costs are lower, but the total ownership costs of that particular software also tend to be lower. Now, think of the software that you use. I guarantee most of you are using VLC as your media player. Now, VLC is an open source software. It does everything that you can throw at it. Why would you spend money on something that doesn't even do as much work? But VLC is free. Now, it does both those things. It's free and open source. Uh, but you use a bunch of you using others as well. So Chrome, for example, is free, but it's not open source. But VLC is both free and open source, right? So while VLC was free upfront, if you needed to make any changes to VLC, those would also come at low dollar cost, but maybe it needs a little bit more effort for you to figure out how to make it work. So the one is a benefit, there's a financial benefit, but two, there is some time involved if, for example, there is a change that you need to make. So that's one of the downsides of open source software, that potentially open source software is slightly harder to use, at least for entry level users. Usually there exists one or the other solution in terms of a version or a fork of that software. But otherwise, because the community is so engaged around it, so many people are working around it, you can usually Google the query that you have, and you will usually run into a discussion board where a solution has been provided, whether or not it's been integrated into the main fork. So second, there is continuous development on most of these projects. If it's an up and running project, there is continuous development and the software is always improving. Third, you're not tied to the business model of a large organization that is actually selling the software. Tomorrow, we've seen this happen with big corporations. They commit to a software, they develop in say 1990 till 2000. They've been basically doing incremental updates of this software, but in 2000 the market for that software has completely disappeared. Say desktop publishing doesn't, I mean, nobody's making consumer grade desktop publishing in paid versions anymore. But if you were doing that software tomorrow, they would pull the plug on that software and say we don't want to commit any more resources to something that we can't sell. Now, if you were a user of that proprietary software, tomorrow you don't have a solution. That software doesn't exist anymore, or there's no support for that software anymore. However, if it were an open source software, and even if the market for it disappeared, then maybe a smaller team would take up the maintenance for that, for a fork of that software, and they would always be providing support for you. So that's another advantage. And to me, the biggest advantage of open source is security. Again, coming back to the eyeballs and the shallow bugs, your better greater number of coders just leads to better code and to security. And the only places where this is not applied is maybe where say the government defense infrastructure, say the Pentagon or the raw, they want to use a software to do something internal, then they'll not use open source software, or they might even, but they tend not to. Financial service providers like Wall Street firms, for example, don't like using open source software because they like building in their proprietary algorithms and they don't want to give people access to that. But at scale, a lot of enterprise guys will be using these open source solutions. There are some downsides. So, like I said, it's less user friendly, especially at the beginning. There is definitely hardware compatibility issues with some of the open source software, but there's usually somebody working on a solution, because if I'm a developer and I have a problem with my hardware, I will put a fix and eventually it'll get pulled into a commit that gets solved. The biggest problem at enterprise scale is that there are liability issues. Since no warranties are offered with open source software traditionally, I can't say that a mistake that happened on my system was because of software and push that responsibility onto somebody else. This has legal and business implications. And the last one is there's less support for user training. So if you were introducing, say, open source software to an entire organization, for example, a couple of the previous companies that I used to work with were run entirely on open source. Um, there are very few people who can come and train your users in moving from a proprietary software to a new software. There'll always be people who are willing to train you on Microsoft Office or something else, but finding the equivalent service on open source is a little bit harder. But that's what it is. Those are downsides. It is a decision that you need to make on your own. But as developers, I would say it's a no-brainer. GitHub currently sees people from Microsoft, Google, Oracle, uh, everywhere, Apple, contribute code to the platform because it hones their own skills and it takes their passion projects forward. There is no reason why, as a developer, you shouldn't be involved in the open source project, right? So, all the very best to you. I will hand this over to Nirupama. But if there are any questions, I'd be happy to take them if you'd leave them as comments.
That was so amazing, sir. I think, uh, starting from where you mentioned about the industry standards, I think that was very insightful. And I see a lot of people have joined us. We do have a few questions. I'll just put them up on the screen. And see, so we have Soumyadeep Roy questioning, can open source software be used for commercial purposes? Your words, sir.
Okay. Okay, no, that's a great question, Swamideep. So to answer that question, in a word, yes, it can. Um, there are what it comes down to is the kind of licensing that's available for the software that you're using. There are several types of licenses for different open source software. For example, there is a so again this comes back to a question of philosophy. So the more restrictive licenses there is, Richard Stallman is a big proponent and he's the founder of the copy left movement, which says if I've developed open source software today and I put it out in the world and you use that to develop an incremental software, then automatically you need to give the same rights to the next developer. So the next developer must also make their software. You must make your software free. The next developer after that must make their own software free, and you can't use this for commercial. You can't sell the software to anybody. However, it does not keep you from using that software as a base of another system. So if you look at, say, actually, let's talk about some of the other licensing. At maybe the other end of the spectrum with regard to licensing is so what Richard Stallman releases copyleft licenses is usually under the GNU public license, the GNU General Public License called GPL, which is now in version 3. So GPL version 3 is one of the open source licenses that are used by the Free Software Foundation, and there anything built using GPL v3 software is usually mandated to be free. You can't build any commercial things on top of it. However, in direct response to this, there are more permissive licenses like, say, the BST license or the MIT license or the Apache license, which MIT says you can mix open source software with proprietary software. You can take open source software and do with it what you want. As long as you release it with the MIT license, anybody else do whatever they want. If they want to build commercial application on top of it, they want to charge people for it, absolutely you can do this, right? And this is what a lot of corporate organizations do. For example, if you look at Red Hat runs the Red Hat Enterprise License Linux, which is a paid software, but it runs an open source version of it called CentOS, right? They're almost identical. Red Hat just offers paid support with RHEL, and that's built into the paid model there. Similarly, what Chrome is doing with Chromium or what Microsoft Edge is doing, they can build software on top of this and then sell it as their own. They don't charge for it necessarily, but Microsoft, for example, bundles it with their own PCs or with Windows. That's a choice that they can make. There are licenses available for most of these. What you need to, so if you're taking a call as to whether or not I can commercialize this software, you need to go look at when you enter the Git hub for a particular open source software project, you need to go first look at their README and see what license this is under.
Okay, I'll be adding another question then. So Krish Chopra has asked something. It's a big question. It has a few parts as well. How does open source contribution assure authenticity? Like nowadays, projects are easily available as they're open source. So what if an interviewee makes use of these as for personal projects?
Also a fantastic question, Krish. So I think the answer for this is, where is this claim being made? If someone's claiming on their CV, then and they have this code with them, it doesn't tell us anything. What it will tell us is, for example, when we look at a technical candidate, we ask them for their Git link, right, for their own Git repo. We go to the Git repo and we look at what commits, what collaborations, what projects they were part of, how frequently, how often they update, and which of those got accepted, right? So that is at the source. So when we say that there has to be one source of truth for whatever you're claiming, that source is usually your GitHub repository. So how many of what channel, what folks you're part of, what channels you're part of, what where the commits happen, that's what we're looking at. You having access to source code doesn't tell us anything. And I don't think will anybody who knows how Git works will not claim having the source code as proof of their participation in the project.
Yes, I think that makes sense. People actually getting into open source have tried to create a good fine line between owning it and contributing to it. So that's the fine line I think we should be able to maintain. I think that is
We
also
actually see. So I'll just make, sorry, one addition to it. There is a trend, especially at the entry level, where a lot of people will say that this was a project that I worked on, and it's usually a clone of an open source project. And I suspect that is one of the risks that Krish is talking about. Yes, it's absolutely possible to clone it, but it's easy to see where the clone came from, right? If it's a private Git repo, for example, right, or it's a public one where people can actually say, and if it's a public one, you will be open to scrutiny. People will be looking at your code and saying, this seems to be a clone of this. You've not done any attribution, etc. But if you're an experienced as a developer yourself, you can look at these clones and say, okay, this looks like somebody else's work, and that usually requires one or more senior resources to do.
yes. As I was saying, we have. I think these are all the questions we have. I'll just check. Uh, okay, I think we have another question. I'll just add. King Shook, if I'm not wrong, is asking, sir, according to you, do you think open source software is secure compared to non-open source softwares?
Kingshuk, it's a fair question. It's very hard to answer on a software by software basis, right? On a package by package basis. Also, because there are upstream and downstream effects of security flaws. Tomorrow, for example, if a day zero exploit is discovered in the Linux kernel, then that would affect everything that flows thereafter. So it would affect every distro that has ever come out since that flaw was discovered in the kernel. So, but going back to what I said something at the beginning, right? Um, the saying by one of the gurus of open source, Eric Raymond, that says, with enough eyeballs, all bugs are shallow. If just compare the theoretical situation of you writing code on your own and 10 people writing code and 10 people also testing code. They're not just writers, right? All your users are now testers as well. If more people were testing your code, more people were evaluating your code, there is a greater likelihood, no guarantee, but a greater likelihood that any security flaw, any bug, any bad feature will be captured quicker. That is the general trend. Can I guarantee that any software is free of bugs? Absolutely not, right? But if I'm going to be working at enterprise scale or even as a single consumer, I'd rather choose an open source project with a lot of devs working on it than a closed one.
So that is a very valid point, especially for students, students or contributors who are actually trying to expand and not only stick to a few patterns of work they have been doing. It is very important to be working with more devs and see how 50 people
Yes,
can think about on the same topic. I think that is
absolutely.
something even I really like doing. I would get into. So I think we are done with the questions. And I really feel that you did help out a lot, considering the questions also came very insightfully and you answered them so well. Thank you so much for joining, Rajat sir. And it
My
was a
pleasure.
pleasure
Thank you for
having
having
you.
me.
Yes, thank you so much for enlightening students on open source and especially in the month of October. That means a lot. Thank you so
Bye bye.
much. Bye. Take care. Thank you so much. And till now, we have had the keynote by Sir Rajat. And now we'll probably take a break for a minute or two, and then we can get back to session on a hands-on session on Git and GitHub just in a few seconds. So I hope you're all, still in with us and enjoying open source. Now we are moving forward to the part where what is open source, what so over the period of if you're actively a part of the community, even if you're new, I hope now we can clear out a few doubts for you. So I would start by introduction my session with introduction to Git and GitHub, where we'll be going from back from why we are here in this session to what you can do to be go out of this session fruitfully and have actually achieved something, maybe starting from easier steps, starting in a way where it is not very effortful for you as well or me. So I would starting here Hacktoberfest, and also that a website that you can visit is hacktoberfest.com, is a community led initiative in the month of October, where open source is celebrated very fruitfully, where you can actually jump in and look into projects, start working, and actually gain something out of it. Two gains that come out of Oktoberfest are swag kits after you're done contributing, or you can plant a tree across anywhere. You can actually just give in yours instead of receiving the swag kits. You can actually say that plant for me. So that's Hacktoberfest. You can register there and check out their features and everything. It goes on from it teaches you, it expects you to do contributions, and it maintains all your contributions and everything. You have to give four contributions in the month of October in order to complete your Hacktoberfest. So now, how do you contribute to Hacktoberfest? What do you need to contribute to Hacktoberfest? And what is contributing to Hacktoberfest, first of all? Contributing to Hacktoberfest is basically contributing to open source in the month of October four times. But this is just to create and help create awareness about you contributing more and more to the open source community and learning from there and learning together, so that eventually the the technology that is being built in the open source community becomes more friendly to you and me as well, right? So what do you need to contribute to it? Very simple things. You need two things: you need Git and you need GitHub. So it is not something you can buy or you can keep. These are a few websites that we'll be going through, and what they they are going to work with, what are the roles they are going to play. So I would just if my screen, so I am Nirupama Singh, for those of you who don't know. And this would be my, if you want to look up to me on any of the socials, these are my socials. And okay, moving forward, so what do you need to start contributing, and what do you need to get into Git and GitHub? You need three simple things: a GitHub account, which is free of cost, where just add your email ID. If you're a student, definitely sign up with your student account, because then GitHub provides you so many features and returns, especially to students, so that they're able to learn more with more accessibility to even premium content, right? And you need your favorite code editor, as this is a hands-on session. We'll be even going in, my favorite one is VS Code, so we'll be going through that one. And you need Git installed in your system, which you can very simply do by going to the Git website and installing it, and then you just install it globally and it works out, everything is fine. Why Git is installed in a system is something we'll look at a little later. But what is Git? So Git is a I would say, also adding in between, if any of you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the comment section right now. And over, when we are moving forward, I will definitely try to answer all of them. And right, good. Also, before I get exact extremely into the session, I have a little announcement to make. So we have a the session is how you can create your first pull request. I will be dropping in the repository link for a repo app that I've created, where you can try to, while learning with me, you can actually do your first. If it is your first PR, amazing, congratulations, do your first PR with us. If you have already done PRs, still please contribute with us. And this does not count towards the Hacktoberfest contribution, but this definitely counts towards, if this is not the right word, as attendance for the event, where later on we'll be picking up special mentions, or people who have done it very well, and we have some of them, those who really impress us, and we'll be giving them away swags. So I'll just drop the link for the same, for the repository. Just if you give me a second. I hope you can just check out in the comment sections right now. I just dropped in a link for Days of Open Source repository. If you don't know how to contribute to it, I will be walking you through that in next. I will probably 15 minutes. If you already know how to contribute to a repository, definitely go through it and start working on it already. It is not much to add to. It is something like a little icebreaker for those who are not very well versed with this, so that along the lines of my teachings, you can actually work on this as well. And later we can see, if you have any doubts on anything, totally feel free to drop them in the comment section and I'll answer them. Right, thank you so much. And okay, moving forward to the presentation. What is Git? So Git and GitHub, although looking like Git and GitHub are together, these are two very different terms. Not very different. This the positioning is very different. For example, when we talk about front end and back end, they come together. Your website is running together on the both front end and back ends, and you do not see the back end working differently, right? You don't have to go somewhere else to see the working of a back end, of a website backends. You actually, it's on the same platform, but in depth, there are always two parts to it, front end and the back end. The same goes with Git and GitHub. While Git is the version control system that lets you work on, lets you control your version, add to your repository and everything. If you're not aware about a few terms in here, we will definitely go through them as well in the in next few minutes. Okay, so looking at the points, just covering the points here, it's a command line link version control system. It's open source, definitely, and it's totally free of cost. There is no cost for anything on Git. Like, even if you go keep looking, there's nothing to find. Then every project that uses Git has a dot Git folder, which I will show you in the hands-on as well. And definitely Git works offline as well, but it does not work offline in the sense of maintaining a version control. But you can definitely still code on it and still keep working on it while you do not have the internet, but you'll eventually need your internet for GitHub, which we are coming to next. So what is GitHub? GitHub is a simple website. But what does GitHub do? Because mainly, whenever we actually talk about open source or talk about Git or talk about GitHub, everything is on github.com. But, you know, I just mentioned that we are doing everything. We are doing all the work on Git. That the .git file is due to the Git. So what is GitHub? GitHub is your cloud for all the code that you're doing. And now, if you look at GitHub, and if you've been already walked through GitHub, seen a few repositories here and there, studied from there, you'll see that it holds a lot of code. It holds the amount of code that one can just actually sit and actually gain the knowledge of so many technologies. So github.com is basically a cloud for all your code that you want to put up online as open source. There are options to put it public or private as well, just for yourself. or just for your team to work on. That was where private comes in. But then for open source, you're keeping your repository online, which is public, and although the whole world can see it, just the way I sent you a repository link just now. That repository is a public repository, and you will be able to access it and work on it eventually, right? So that is GitHub. GitHub is the cloud for all your repositories. So whatever you're coding down here in your system will eventually, if you want to contribute with your team, if you are working in a team, and there is four people are in different cities and they're working on the same thing, and definitely even if four people are in the same room, they cannot work on the same system, right? So they'll be working on their own systems. And how does this whole project get together? Do they WhatsApp each other content, and then they someone copy paste the project inside the project, and one person is just maintaining it one single VS code and others are working in segments? No, that is actually, a very messy way to control stuff, and it actually loses version control as well in the middle. So while you're working on, very large projects, it is very difficult to continue working that way. So step one is how to put up your, local or system for folder project folder up on GitHub as a repository. First of all, what is a repository? I think you must have already noticed the way I've been talking about it. Repository is basically a folder of a code, and now we call it repository on GitHub. It's just a folder of code. So your local code folder, create a repo on GitHub, and you link them to share it or store it online. So when you create a folder, in your local system, I'll create it in my VS Code system IDE. Once I'm done doing it there are two ways to set it up on GitHub.com. Either I go by creating a single repository up on github.com and then uploading all my code there by cloning, or the other thing that I can do is start from beginning, create a .git as mentioned before, .git folder in my download git in my local repository, and just push the code to my GitHub profile. If you are a collaborator to that repository on the github.com as well, your local code will definitely go to your online repository. Moving forward, words that I will be repeating a lot and words that I have already been repeating a lot. So repository is there. Repository is the folder where you're storing all your code. Then there's pull, push, commit, and branch. I'll just switch my screen. Okay, wait, I think we can do it here. So pull and push are basically when you go deeper. uh, like I'll be mentioning them in a few sentences only because we have to move to the pull request part as well. But pull and push are the most basic. Git pull and git push are the most basic commands where you are actually fetching the code from github.com to your github.git folder, and push is you're sending your code from your .git folder to up there on the github.com repository. Commit is staging all the changes that you have just made, committing them before actually pushing them, so that you know everything's working out, the file sizes are correct and everything. And then if there are any problems occurring, you can sort them out and then you can push them. Branches, GitHub branches are basically, there's a simple single branch every time you create a repository, that is known as the main branch. Once you're done with the main branch, there are, if you're working in a lot of teams, and for pull requests as well, we'll be creating a different branch for you to work on. Individual branches will be created and you can work on that branch. So I know if I am Nirupama and there's the main branch and I keep editing in the main branch, there will be an issue because Nirupama and, for example, Sarthak are working on the same project and there are a lot of conflicts that come in. So when I'm working and Sarthak's working, we will be creating our own branches, working there differently, then merging them or putting a pull request, as we'll be going to through that. So that is where branches help you to work parallelly on the same project. Moving forward, some more words. Branches has already been covered. Merge is mixing to code, which also is basically me working on something. Another person is, I'm working on the nav bar. Another person is, for example, working on the footer. But we have been working in our different branches. So how does it work? How do I put the whole code together. I put in a pull request, and the viewer then checks and verifies our code that okay, Nirma was given the task for navbar. Is it the navbar that she has made? And then they just review the code and they merge it, and there you have everything in your main branch, which is the branch. If you are hosting your website, main branch is the branch that you're hosting, that the server will be hosting, right? Git init means initializing GitHub in your repository. It is a simple command you can apply. So if you already have a code written, you wrote a code about 10 months ago when you started learning, you did not know about GitHub, so you just made something in your system and kept it there. Now you want to put it up on your GitHub repository. What do? You just initialize Git, right? Git init, and then you get push the whole thing to your account. Okay, reset. Reset is one of my favorite ones because it does save me a lot of times, saves a lot of work that I probably did not do right as such when I was thinking I'm doing it right. So every time I make a git commit and there is something that I've done wrong, I can always, and it is still risky to do it, but if I'm committing things in the right way, if I reset, use git reset, it is going to come back a commit down. So it will go back to the last commit, and the main branch will come to the last commit, and all the mistakes that I made in my last commit will be removed, and the commit before that one will be definitely used. Then git log is, as the word suggests, it gives you all the details of your workings. Okay, now some coding. Okay, I will just need a minute to uh, share my screen, VS Code. Just in the uh, in the meanwhile, if there are any questions, please definitely drop them. I hope you can see my screen, and as we can see right now, this is the same GitHub repository that I've shared with you in the comment section, where you will be contributing to your uh, where you will be contributing. So I'll walk you through the repository once and then tell you how it works, right? So this is a repository where I've made a code where you can simply just put in all your details, and this is a card that comes. I think I've lost my screen share. Just give me a minute, I'll be there. Okay, I hope you can see my screen now. So yes, this is the GitHub repository that we'll be working on. And if you can see the card, if you put in the details right and contribute it to right, your details will come up here on a screen on a responsive profile card. And I think then you must have learned your first PR by this time, right? So if you can check the README, which is README is basically a detailed, or not even exactly detailed, but a crisp summary of the project. If you are going to contribute to any repository, any open source project, for a Hacktoberfest, check that they have the Hacktoberfest tag here. For example, in this particular repository, there is the Hacktoberfest tag here, so you can definitely contribute here, and then that will be counted in your as one of your four Hacktoberfest contributions. And the other thing is, always look for how to contribute or how you can contribute in any open source project, so you are working it right and you're doing the right things, so there's no confusion and there's always the right information with you. In this particular project, I will be showing you how you can put up your first pull request. And while doing this, as mentioned before, this is an activity we'll be conducting. and there will be giveaways also based on that. So you can just do your pull request by editing a few details inside our HTML code, and that is also just your details. So the few steps, very few steps on how to contribute to a open source project is, see, I'm logged in from my profile. Now this is the link that you'll open. When you click on the that link, you first create you first fork it, you fork your project, right? Always fork your project. It is going to ask you that this is the name. Now this is going to come under your name, and this will be the name of the repository, and copy the main branch only. If I had more branches, it would have asked me the question for the same ones. Right now there's only main branch in the repository, so that's there. Create fork. So the first step is to create fork. Second step, create your own branch. So once you create your own branch, you are able to work on it, and I will know that Nirupama has worked on this repository. So I'll be naming it Nirupama Singh and create branch. Okay, so if you look at it now, what do we do? Okay, so you've already forked it. Now you have created your own branch. Now you need to clone your code. You can go here, clone it. Okay, cloning is simply, you can go and you can in the terminal, if it's visible. Wait just a minute. I hope it's visible now. In the command line, you can just write git clone. Just a minute. You can write git clone. Okay, we are already in the, I've opened the last one, it's all right. Git clone and the GitHub link. So this will create, clone it for you in your own system, and now you can start working on it. As I already have the code cloned in my laptop, we'll just be working on that. Okay. Simple way to while working on any repository is just do a git pull every time, so that you know you are updated. Okay, we exited that one. Uh, Always do git pull, so you know you are on the, updated. See, there are changes that have come to the repository, and they've just reached my local system. So if I had started working without these, I might have lost on some of my work, or have done wrong, work that was not needed. If you're working in a project, that is how it goes, right? You work together, so you're doing something and other thing. Once you are done cloning it, you'll see comments here for our repository, and definitely you can check out, uh, just a minute. So you can see here, when you will clone it, you will be on this is the HTML file that you'll be working on. You can copy this inside the HTML folder, copy this page, paste a new one, paste it there, and rename it to your name, so that I know you have done it. I will be naming it nirupama.html. When you'll go back to the, you know, where is yes, how to contribute, you'll see fork this repository, create a new branch. Then in the folder of HTML, please copy the HTML file and name it under your name.html. And now these are the required details that I need to fill in. What are the details that I need to fill in? I need to fill in my full name. That's Nirupama.Singh. Then moving forward again, so this is going to give the title of the HTML folder file. Then again, uh, Nirupama.Singh, and my city is Ghaziabad. Then there is designation is I'm a front end developer at Reskill. Then you can enter your GitHub profile links here and your Twitter profile link here. Then why do you love open source? I love open source because I get to learn new things every day. Give us your answers here. So I'll now be running this. You can just run it by simply going live, or running a it on live server, and that is pretty much it. I will show the output to you. I'm switching my this is the output that will come out. So as you can see right now that this is a picture of a boy. Other things are all good. Nirpama Singh, Gazibad, everything's coming. If I had put up my GitHub profile links here, they would also show up. Right now it's not there. And why do you like open source? Because I get to learn new things every day. One thing that is I don't feel good about is that I'm female and this picture is of a boy. So you can simply see in the HTML code that there is a male.jpg. You can just change it to female.jpg, and here is the change. Right. So when you're contributing for all the males, I would suggest you change the image file to male.jpg, and the females do it to female.jpg. Moving forward, so I have now this is how you are changing the file, but now is the main part. How do you create your pull request? For that, we'll go back to the code now, and just do one thing. Right now, as you can see, we are in the main branch. I will create a new branch. I will name it Nirupama. As I've mentioned before, you should name the branch based on your name for this particular repository. Or when you're contributing in open source, you can actually even name it on on the feature that you're working on, and just put your code up there. I'm renaming it Nirupama. Once I'm done, this moves to Nirupama. Now I will commit my changes. Okay, and this has to be a comment which explain what changes I'm adding. So I'll write I have added my info, right? So what are the few changes that we made? The few changes that we have made is we've copied this file. I hope none of you actually change anything in this file, although it will not, we wouldn't be accepting those pull requests. So you just simply copy this and then create it from your name, and then inside that one you make changes with your name. I would suggest rather you do it with your full name. So if there are any two people with the same names, we can actually work that out, and there are no merge conflicts. So the two changes was I copied it, I made it my own, and then I changed it. Then I moved to a branch named after me, and now I'm pushing this code to my GitHub repository that I had forked. It will just be done in a second, right? It's done. It shows it's done. There were no conflicts, nothing came up. It simply just went to my GitHub repository. Now we will go back and see. Now, okay, I think the terminal wasn't visible for the cloning part. I'll do that, just a minute. I hope the terminal is visible right now. The way that you can actually clone it is quite easy. You just find the space where you want to clone it. So I'd rather clone it here in the D folder. So I'll go back to the D folder. Then I'll write git clone, and then I will be pasting the link of the repository here. So the cloning link is of the forked GitHub repository. I'll be cloning that one because that is under my name, and this is how it will get cloned. Right now, it will see it's done, and then you can go to that folder simply. I think it is named Day of Open Source, so I'll just go to Day of Open Source and start working on it. Right. Uh, I hope it's clear. Otherwise, we can come back to it. I'll just finish with putting a pull request. Uh, So we will go back to the repository. This is where we left off. It was about day of open source. This is the one I forked. And now if I refresh it, I can see that this is the main branch. Now I will going, I see, I made the Nirpama Singh branch down there in my, wait, yeah, sorry. So I made the Nirpama Singh branch down there in my um, VS Code. Now it has been pushed here, so I can see my branch here. I just go to it, and you can see that I made a few changes 3 minutes ago, added my information. I'll go inside HTML, and you should be able to see a file name nirpma.html. This is how I would be expecting to receive the pull request. So now I will be submitting a pull request, and now as I can see, I've already received uh, 9 pull requests, and that sounds amazing. I think those of you who knew open source or knew how to contribute, thank you so much for doing this. But I'll be just showing it once so that for those of you who don't know, so we you just go to pull request, you submit a new pull request. So you remember I said there is the base main branch, so it's there. Now I want to compare my new branch, that is the Nirupama branch, to the main one, right? And it looks like okay, it does say that like there are changes, right? So I would just create a pull request, and if I want to add leave a comment, if you want to add anything so that we can see during your review, this will only be visible to us, you can put it up here and then create a pull request. Once the pull request is committed, this is how it comes up. This is going to be a chain of conversation that once I do I merge the pull request later on after viewing your pull request, they will come up to you as an issue over here, and you'll be able to see what has been going on. It looks like a conversation, keeps going on whenever we can always put a review and something. So I'll go back to pull request, and now I can see that added my info by Nirma Singh is here, I think, and there are more. So that is how it is done. You have officially, I have just officially done a pull request in this repository with a card that has all my information, and whenever I'm going to run it, it is going to work for me. And I think with this, I can end my session saying that, if you have any questions, please do drop them. And if there is anything that you want to ask right now, please drop them and I'll be, going through them. I'll just check the comment section once. Shantanu has asked if we have to create a pull request to the reskill repo. Yes, it is a public repository that I've been able to create in my organization. So you can definitely do it there. It is for learning purpose and for the giveaway purpose. That's all. Then there is just a minute. I think these few were sorted. Uh, I think him is asking to repeat the procedure. I think I can summarize it. If you don't want it, if you don't want for me to do the demo again, I would just tell you the steps. One, you can actually write it down. Fork your repository. I'll share the screen actually where you can just scroll down on the repository that I shared with you. This is my screen. No, okay. So open source, days of open source, and here you can use the readme.md. The first step is fork your repository, then you can create your new branch. As mentioned, please name it on your name. Then inside the folder of HTML, there is an index.html file. Just copy that file and paste it and name it after your full name.html, and When you go inside the after copying it, go inside the folder file named after you. There are comments for each step where you can actually make the change. Once you are done filling these informations, you can create a pull request. You can simply do it by first pushing your code up there on your forked repository in the same branch that you had created for yourself. Then you simply go, as suggested before, you go on pull request, you create a new pull request, you submit to compare which branches you want to compare which with which ones, and simply see it shows that no description available, and this particular information, yeah, pull request has already been set up, because after setting up a pull request, I haven't made any changes to the nirma branch, so it's showing me this way. Otherwise, if I had made, it would simply let me create a pull request. But once you're done clicking create pull request, that's all you needed to do. And let me know if this summarizes it for you. I think okay, I don't see any more questions here. I think I'll wait for 2 more minutes and let's see if there are any questions. I don't. Okay, I think the doubt has been cleared. It's all right. Thank you so much. And do set up your pull request. And so this was a very basic pull request where I mentioned to you that always check the contribution part, where how you can contribute to it. I also showed you a open source repository where it was mentioned that it is Hacktoberfest. It allows Hacktoberfest, which means if you want to contribute to Hacktoberfest, you need to make sure you're registered on Hacktoberfest platform using a GitHub profile, and B, you're contributing to those repositories. Those are already authorized by Hacktoberfest for contributions, right? After your fourth contribution you will receive your prize for doing so, and I hope after receiving the prize you still continue contributing to the same cause. And open source is always revolving. I have learned so much from there, and there's always you can learn more. Right now I see 11 pull requests. Okay, 12th one just came in, and I hope more of you do so same. I saw a few comments about swags and everything, so I hope you definitely you know do the pull request, and I hope you learn something. It does not benefit me in any sort of way that I receive so many pull requests, but I just want to see that I was able to create something, or you know give out some particular good information that you can use to work. Uh, I and thank you so much. I think I'm done with my Git and GitHub session and how to create your pull request. I We will be resuming. Uh, okay, I just see a question. I don't have a Twitter profile. What do I add there? You can simply leave it open. It will still run on its own. Although we would love to connect with you, so if you're on Twitter and GitHub, do remember to put it up there so we're able to connect with you. And if we liked your pull request, we will definitely, for the swags giveaway, we will do that. We will be taking a break for 2 to 3 minutes. I hope you stick around with us. And thank you so much for joining us once again. And I hope you learned something. I was able to give something to the open source community, and we can work more together. Thank you so much for waiting. I think I can say that the break is over. I see a lot of you are still here. Thank you so much for staying with us. And we are being joined by Chavi Garg, a community moderator at Azure Developer Community. A very, a member you have been seeing a lot lately, and she's been very active with the Azure Developer Community and everything that's been going around. And she'll be talking a little more about that. If you're new, you can get more entitled on it. There's always good to have new people join us. Hi, Chavi, how are you?
Hi Nirupama, thanks a lot for such a nice intro, and it's an honor for me to be here. And obviously, it's always great to work with Azure developer community. There's a lot of things that I got to learn from Azure developer community. Just give me a second.
Chavi will just be back, and till then, okay, I think we can just wait for Chavi to join in.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay, Chavi, I think we can continue from where we left off. And let's start. And community, if you have any questions regarding Azure developer community and how to be a member, definitely Chavi is the person you can reach out to, or drop in questions here and she can go through them. Chavi, you'll
Sure,
take
sure,
this.
sure. Cool. So, hi everyone. I am very much happy to see you all in like the today's open source day. It's always great to have Azure developer communities like amazing initiative, and you might have seen me on the Discord and a lot of stuff. So in that case, like today we are here obviously for open source day. You had some amazing sessions with us. So also you know that like Azure developer communities always comes up with so many stuff. So you might be thinking that how we are able to handle with so many things at just one time. So yeah, we have such an amazing team working on backend, and we are always open for your contributions. If you want to contribute in anyhow to our Azure developer community, it can be in the form of like sessions, it can be in the form of offline events. We're very happy to host you all, because it's always about sharing your learnings with the community. And like you can just drop your comments that okay, how was the session, did you feel amazing about it? You can just drop down your comments, you can just drop down your views, your feedback, that did you loved it or not, because we are like like Shiva will also be joining super soon. So in that case, you can just drop down your like reviews, that did you love the session or not, and especially like till now, what were the main key learnings that you have received? Because I know that whenever it comes to Git and GitHub, the session is super. Thanks a lot, Prahlad, for your such a super nice comment. That's nice to hear that. And yeah, always see like whenever it comes to GitHub and whenever it comes to Oktoberfest, everyone is so much enthusiastic that yes, I also want to join in and I also want to contribute to open source. And but there are so many things that comes into your mind, that who will be guiding us and how we are going to proceed. And there are a lot of things obviously. That's why Azure Develop Community come up with such an amazing initiative of Open Source Day, and here we are to like resolve all of your doubts. After that, the expert talk was super soon. I'm super. Thanks a lot, Prahlad, again for such a nice comment of us. And also, like if you will come across with any sort of doubt anytime, you can just reach out to us anytime on our Azure Developer Communities official social handles, or you can reach out to our expert speakers as well. They are very open to take all your doubts, and they are very much happy if you'll like ask anything to them. They will resolve all of your doubts, and it's gonna be something great for us as well to understand that how you felt with all the sessions and everything. And again, when it comes to Azure developer community, like there are a lot of times that happens that I come across with one question that okay, how should I contribute? Or I have stage fear. I am an introvert. I don't know how should I just come up on the YouTube channel and say that okay, I can share my knowledge. So it happens a lot of times. So in that case, if you are facing that sort of issue, obviously we are very much happy to help you out in coping up with your all the fears and your like nervousness. We are very happy to like make you stand out. Okay, so don't worry about it if you are stuck somewhere, or if you don't know how to proceed, or if you have any sort of doubt, you can just reach out to us anytime, and we are very happy to like take all your doubts and help you in your learnings.
Right, Chavi. Sorry, I just wanted to add in, how you can contribute. So I will tell you from a little personal experience. When I first heard about open source, so I used to be very worried. So there are so many huge companies, even smaller ones, that open source companies. And I used to think, okay, will I be sitting and, going through huge lines of codes of other people's projects that I have no idea about, and just randomly do anything and they will accept it. So I used to be like, okay, what do I pick? Do I change the color of the buttons, or how does this work? So I started looking. So I think first basic step is to first get your facts clear about what you can contribute to. That is where a good README file come in. You can actually check and read properly. And if you are a person who's creating a repository where people can contribute to, please always make a good readme file so that everyone's aware what is going around here inside this repository. Second main thing is you don't have to actually think very big while starting and then get scared by it. Okay, so because when you're going to start thinking by doing, okay, I'll make such a huge change, everyone's going to just be like, I'm an open source contributor. So I wish this would work that way. I would have definitely taken that path, but I would rather say, instead of going all out, you can do is uh, you can simply pick up a small project, and as I just showed you, you can change a few things. There are a few open source projects that do let you help starting your journey with open source. They require very minimal changes, and you can just send your pull request, and you can start do your first PR. And that's all I wanted to add. Don't go too big when you're starting. Just
That's
I'll
so true.
be back in a minute, sorry.
Sure, sure. Yeah, exactly. That's so true. And also, like, to be honest, like whenever it comes to contributions, it's always something great to learn. Okay, there's always a learning that goes behind with all these stuffs. Okay, like if you're contributing to the community, if you're contributing to open source, if you're contributing to anyhow to tech, so it's gonna give you back eventually. Like there are like I also used to have podcasts with so many amazing people. So in that case, I see that people having 30 years of experience in corporate are still contributing to the community, and it feels so good to hear and to see them, because ultimately it's been more than 20-30 years that he or she has been working in corporate, and still they are so much open to the contributions. They are not at all thinking that like what's gonna be happening or not, but they are still contributing. They are loving everything. So it's gonna be something. It's actually something great to see. And yeah, like I guess some of you are students. So in that case, obviously, if you are a student, college student, then contributing to open source and contributing to the community is gonna give you back in a very nice way. So don't think a lot about it. If you have any sort of issues, if you are coming across with any sort of doubt, you can just let us know anytime, reach out to us, and we are very happy to resolve it.
That's great, Chavi. Definitely, you can reach out to our website and we can talk more there. So, moving forward with the session, I will be welcoming Shivai here. Shivai Lamba is a program community member, and he's a LFX mentorship mentor. And Shivai will be talking about future avenues and opportunities in open source. So, eventually when we started the session, I saw a lot of comments coming in. What is the future of open source? And I think I have the right guy for you, who can tell you and talk to you about it as long as he wants. And you can always drop in your questions, and he will be happy to answer them. I will just be Shiva is just joining us in a second. Thank you so much.
There's one thing that I wanted to add, that yes, you can just join our Discord server where we talk about Azure, where we have so much amazing quizzes and a lot of activities that actually goes into. So you can just join our Azure Developer Community Discord server. The link is appearing here. It's bit.ly/az Discord. So you can just join our Discord server if you have any sort of doubt. If you want to come across with a lot of things, you can just have a look into it, and we would be very happy to take up your doubts. And obviously, like joining the Azure developer community will give you a lot of exposure, because sometimes, like I guess there's one thing that was going on, Microsoft Ignite, from which that you can actually earn certificates. Okay, so there are a lot of things that actually goes on. So with that note, that's all about me and about Azure developer community. We have Shivai with us. I welcome you, Shivai.
Hi Shivai, how are you doing?
Yeah, hi. Just one second. Am I audible to everyone? Can
Yes,
you just
yes.
confirm if?
Audible and everything good to go. Everything's working.
Okay, okay, perfect.
So,
Yeah.
yes. So I was just speaking about you, that you'll be talking about future avenues and opportunities in open source. And let me
Yeah,
tell you, before we even started with the session, I had a lot of questions coming in where they wanted to know, how to start with it. And the end question was, what is the future? What I'm going to, if I keep contributing, what is going to come back to me? So I hope
yeah,
I have the best person for that, and I'll give it over to you. And okay.
yeah, sure. And just give me 1 second. I will just bring up my slides as well. So just 1 second. Um, let's see. All right, perfect. So let me bring up my slides. And do let me know if everything is visible. Let
Yes,
me
yes.
start sharing my screen. All right. Um, is my
I
screen visible?
Yes, it is visible. I hope you can see it on the screen as well.
Yep. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Okay, over to you, Shivan.
All right, thank you so much. So first of all, thank you so much, Reskill India and the Azure developer community and Nirupama for inviting me to this session. I'm actually at another open source event, so it's really great to be presenting this virtually in front of all of you. So today's session is going to be all about, so I think as Nirupama mentioned that so far in the past 1.5 hours, you've learned about what exactly is open source and how to start contributing to open source. So I'm going to be taking it forward and sharing what are some of the career opportunities and opportunities not just related to jobs, and how you can avail them by contributing to open source. So just a very quick introduction about myself. I'm Shivai, and of course, like Nirupama has already shared that, but I'll just probably want to share from how open source actually helped me, right? Just quickly sharing about my journey as I uncover some of these events like and opportunities that you can avail by contributing to open source. I'll also share some of my personal experiences, that how I benefited from them and like how that helped me shape my career. So currently I'm a developer relations engineer at Millisearch. It's an open source search engine, and I work primarily focusing on our Rust and our JavaScript SDKs. And it was because of my open source journey that I was able to actually avail an opportunity in a company that actually functions primarily on open source. So right now I'm involved with a lot of developer communities that are open source, and my full-time role is also open source. So I am pretty much like surrounded by open source all the time. So yeah, with that in mind, let's get started. Now, of course, I mean, you probably might have already covered this, but I'll just like to share in a glimpse and kind of just summarizing why one should basically embrace open source, like why should companies and why should individuals also start contributing to open source, right? And why should companies also embrace open source for their projects and for the products that they're building? So primarily the biggest one is the cost of entry, because as compared to let's say closed source software that might be being built in 20 engineers all over the world, in any open source project, on the sake of the open source project, you can have thousands and even hundreds and thousands of contributors who are contributing to that particular project. So let's say in the case of project entities, we're having more than 100,000 people who are contributing to these open source projects. And that's what makes the quality and reliability of these projects a lot more bigger, because of the fact that we are having so many contributors from around the world contributing to these projects at all times, right? From parts of India, Asia, and even all across the globe. And that what makes discoverability of bugs and security vulnerabilities even easier and then fixable. Because in a closed source environment, you're having very limited number of contributors and limited number of people who are contributing to that particular project. And then the second one is the freedom that you get, because since we're talking about free and open source, so you get the ability to be able to contribute from wherever you want at whatever time you want. You can remodify the project as much as you want. And of course the biggest one is the community aspect, because you truly are part of a global community of contributing to these open source projects, and that what makes open source a lot more fun and a lot greater learning as compared to let's say being contributing to a closed source software. And one of the biggest reasons why contributing is important is because of the fact that the first one is really important, which is getting real world software development experience. So if you're like, let's say building your personal projects, that's great, but you don't really get to know what's happening around, right? What are the tools and technologies that are being used to be able to deploy and serve these applications to millions of users? And that's what you learn by contributing to these open source projects, because they use tools and they use technologies, and also not just tool. It's not just related to tools and technologies, but secondly, you also are basically learning about the best practices when it comes to software development, right? Because you work on such large code bases, you work with so many different software engineers, so you learn about the best practices that are also followed in the industry, and this makes you actually job ready and makes you a better software engineer. And of course, the biggest one apart from that is the satisfaction. So let's take an example of a project like VLC Media Player, which is a media player that's open sourced, and there are millions of users who are using VLC Media Player. So if you, let's say, are able to fix a bug that is basically causing an issue for many users, and if you're able to solve that bug and resolve it and push it to production, that is really huge way to showcase that you have skills that impacted so many people. So you get that real world software experience and then the satisfaction to be able to contribute. So I hope that these these ideas about why contributing is so important and how it's so rewarding, right? This is more from the front of your from a personal experience that you gain in terms of the skills and also in terms of the ability to showcase. Now what we'll focus more is on what are some of the opportunities and ways to basically upskill yourself with the help of open source. So the first thing that we're going to be focusing on is a number of different open source programs that are especially meant for students and basically professionals who are early into their career. So we'll take a look at a multitude of such kind of programs, including Gold Summer of Code, MLS Fellowship, all these different programs, and that's basically this particular slide where we have a number of these programs that are meant for beginners and also for experienced contributors to be able to showcase their skills in order to get into open source and then be able to actually contribute to these open source programs. So in a nutshell, a number of these different open source programs are the way that they operate is that they have a number of open source projects and organizations that come under one umbrella, and they open up their open source projects to contributors to be able to contribute. So usually what happens is that you have to basically submit a proposal for one of these project ideas, and the way you'll basically contribute to it. And if you get selected, so for a period of 2 to 6 months, depending on the program, you essentially contribute to it under the mentorship of a experienced mentor. And this helps you to not only contribute to that particular project, but of course learn the development skills as well. And there are a number of 15 20 plus programs that are out there, and there are a number of different blogs that you'll find online, and I'll make sure to also share some of them with you, which showcase a number of different projects. And again, these some of them, like let's say the Google Summer of Code, which has over 200 plus different organizations and 1,000 plus projects that takes place, right? It takes place on a multitude of different programming languages, technology stacks, from web development, Android development, game development, DevOps, right? And some of them are more dedicated towards specific technologies as well. So I'll make sure to share that particular link with all of you towards the end of the session. But the main idea is that these programs serve you the opportunity to be able to contribute to dedicated projects and get mentorship support from experienced folks in the industry who have already been contributing to these projects, so that you're able to make meaningful contributions and then showcase your contributions to others as well. So these programs are a really great way to get started with being able to make some sizable contributions, and of course there are a lot of other great things that happen and a lot of benefits of actually contributing to these projects as well, because you get really nice stipend. And of course, I mean, stipend is just a part of it, but the biggest one is the experience of being able to contribute to open source projects, and that opens up a lot of different other potential opportunities as well for you, which we'll be covering. So just kind of a recap on, if you are interested, right, to contribute to some of these programs, what is the way to basically do that? And I'd like to cover that in a bit. So for that, I'll just go back. So of course, if you are willing to, let's say, contribute to an organization, or if you're willing to contribute to a project, let's say, to one of these open source projects that is part of these programs that we are talking about. So basically the main aspect of being able to contact and work with any of these open source projects. This is like the kind of the three pillars of successful integration that, like, it's there for any project for which you are basically contributing to. So let's say that you're willing to contribute to Mozilla. Mozilla is a very large open source organization that has a number of different projects, including, like, the Firefox browser, and I mean, it's a really huge organization. So let's say if you want to be a part of this organization and want to contribute to it. So these are three things that will definitely help you. So first one is that you can introduce yourself inside the organization. Now, each and every open source organization will usually have some kind of a chat system. So it could be a Slack channel, it could be email, RFC channels, or Gitter, right? Again, depending on the type of communication model that you choose, you can join those communication channels and introduce yourself and share that you are interested in contributing to open source projects. And some of the community members from those organizations will be more than happy to help you get started with them. Then you start searching for projects which you might be interested in contributing to them. And there are two different ways in which you can basically approach in trying to search for these projects. And then once you have finalized which particular projects you might want to contribute to, then you can look out for open issues that you might want to work on. And the two different ways in which you can basically explore how you can search for projects is what I call an top-down approach and a bottom-up approach. So one of the approaches is that you are really looking forward to one of the organizations, like, let's say you're really passionate about Mozilla. So you join the organization, you search for a project that you might want to contribute to, and you really like that project. So then you start learning the tech stack for that particular project. And you learn the technologies, and then you start contributing to it. Of course, the other way around is that you are really passionate web developer, and or you're, let's say, a very passionate machine learning developer. So you are building upon these particular skills, and then you start to look out for projects that are based on that particular skill or that particular technology stack, because there are so many open source projects today that you can easily get an open source project based on the technology stack that you are working with, right? So these are the two different type of approaches that you can embrace, and you can very successfully get started with contributing to open source projects with the help of this approach. And of course, again, the way that you'll basically filter out is either, you'll filter out based on your tech stack preference, or, like, let's say, based on some other filters, right, that you can apply in order to see that, okay, which particular open source project would you want to contribute to. And again, the idea is that you don't have to wait, right? Because the fact is that every open source project will have a number of different types of issues, right? Because there will be beginner friendly issues, there will be some medium and more complex issues. So the idea is that you can still get started by contributing to the beginner friendly issues, right? A lot of these open source projects will have beginner friendly good first issues that you can contribute to. And again, you don't just have to look at from the perspective of, like, contributing right from the beginning. You can always join an open source project and start using that open source project, install it locally in your system, attend some of these community meetups, community meetings that are taking place, and these usually take place on a weekly, monthly basis, depending on the organization, and get yourself accustomed to the entire ecosystem to that particular project, and then start contributing. So contributing is not just like that you join an organization or a project on the first day itself and make a contribution. You can basically make yourself more accustomed to that particular project, and then also start contributing. And of course, the developer cycle is pretty much the same that we have already covered. It's you find issues that you want to contribute to, and let's say reach out to members if you want more insights into how to basically get started by contributing to that particular issue, and then create a pull request. And if you don't find any good issues, try to find out issues that you can probably create yourself. In case you find any issues within the particular project, you can create issues and also work on them. That's the kind of the developer cycle. So, but of course, the one of the things that I'd like to really cover is the imposter syndrome that people might have, because of course there might be some experienced developers and more experienced folks who have been contributing to open source for a long time, and this is a very common scenario that takes place. A very personal experience that also happened to me when I started my open source journey back in 2019. So my first ever contribution to one of the larger organizations was Fosasia. So Fosasia is one of the largest open source organizations in the Asia Pacific region. And to basically contribute to a number of different projects, made around 9 pull requests that all got rejected in a time duration of the first 3 to 4 months contributing. So again, I definitely got a bit depressed that hey, I mean, unable to contribute, and all of my pull requests are getting rejected. And it was only after 4 to 5 months that I basically joined this developer sprint, which was being organized by FOSS Asia. And there are a few of the mentors of the organization that helped me to understand the different rules that are there, and the best practices that are needed to be followed. And this is something that people often neglect. So every organization will have its own set of rules and sort of contribution guidelines that they require the contributors to follow. And if you follow them correctly, and if you have correctly approached that particular issue, then of course your pull request is likely to get accepted. And only once I got to know that yes, I have to follow best practices and that are mentioned by the organization. So that's how I was able to successfully get my first ever pull request accepted. So don't doubt yourself, right? Take your time to get accustomed and take time to learn up the right skills that are required to be able to contribute to open source, and don't rush through it, right? That's the biggest point. Then, and essentially, it kind of applies in a similar way that you shouldn't rush for opportunities as well, right? Because the opportunities will come to you, and I'll share some experiences for how open source opportunities for which I had to apply initially, and then they started to come back to me as I started to build my profile. I'll be sharing some tips and my personal experiences as well. And again, the main idea is that you don't need to be a pro, right? You don't need to be basically an expert in one particular language or in the entire code base, right? Probably this might have already been covered, but I'm just kind of reiterating of this fact that when it comes to opportunities as well, it's pretty much the same, that you don't need to be an expert in a technology to let's just speak about it, right? Apart from the open source pros and the pros on who can avail these opportunities, it's just about them look out for a particular type of project to contribute. Now, outside of these opportunities, and if you get rejected from these, don't feel bad. You can always reapply, because these opportunities, like especially these open source mentorship programs, they occur every year, right? So there are like Google Son of Code, LFX mentorship, and there are like 15 such opportunities that occur on an yearly basis. And some of these, like the LFX mentorship, actually occur every quarter, right? So every quarter there are new projects contribute. So there are tons of different opportunities that you can avail. Now, outside of like the mentorship opportunities, there are also a number of different programs and meetups and conferences that are also basically taking place. So these are primarily focused on getting more people into technology, right? More people into open source. So one of the ones that I really love taking part in is conferences. So there are tons of different type of conferences around the world that are dedicatedly towards open source. So some of these are like some of the largest ones are things like the Open Source Summit that is conducted by the Linux Foundation. It takes place 2 3 times all around the world. Then there are a number of different other uh, conferences that take place, and I'll definitely share some links so that you can apply for scholarships. So they have like dedicated scholarships for open source contributors, dedicated scholarship for students, and basically if you can get these scholarships, you will get a fully paid trip to be able to attend these conferences around the world, right? You can apply as a speaker to these conferences and again get reimbursed to be able to go to these conferences and share about your experiences with open source. Or if like let's say you're a React developer, so there is a React conference, React conferences that take place all around the world. So these are some of the conferences and meetups that take place. Now, outside of these, a lot of different organizations also have something known as these scholarship programs. For example, the Women Tech Makers Scholars, that's dedicated for women in tech. Then the Google Venkat Scholarship. Then Google has this Google Open Source Grant, where if you're an open source contributor, GitHub also has right now recently launched a GitHub externship and GitHub scholarship for maintainers. So if you are an open source maintainer and you want some help, right, you can reach out and you can apply for these kind of open source grant programs where companies basically will support your project, will support you personally, right? Because as an open source maintainer, you're not basically getting paid for maintaining your open source project. So if you are an open source maintainer, all these different scholarship programs, and then these programs which are primarily focused on. Oh, by the way, I think my slides got disconnected. Nirupama, if you could just check once, my slides are no longer visible. Let me just check. Should I reshare my screen? Am I audible to everyone clearly? Okay, perfect. Yeah, so you have a number of these grants that you can also avail. Again, these are opportunities for which, if you are an open source contributor, active maintainer, you can avail these opportunities by signing up for them. You can also reach out to cloud providers. You can, if you're a student, you can also use the GitHub student developer pack, and that can help you to host your projects, and you can learn relevant skills by applying for the different type of scholarship programs that are out there to help you upskill yourself as well, right? So there are tons of different type of opportunities that are primarily focused on getting more people into open source, and these conferences, meetups, and these dedicated programs where the maintainers are awarded with scholarships and grants. These are also other type of opportunities that you can avail with the help of with the help of these opportunities that are provided. Now, I'll just want to probably spend the next 5 minutes talking. Oh, okay. Give me just 1 second. And of course, especially with the especially Azure also provides a lot of different credits for if you're an open source contributor and if you're a maintainer. So there's tons of opportunities that you can get from these programs as well. And outside of these opportunities, right, I'll just want to probably share my experience about that. If you are an open source contributor, uh, what can your journey look like, right? And I'll just want to spend the next 5 minutes talking about my personal journey. So as I mentioned that I started my open source journey in 2019, and I made my first ever contributions to some of these open source projects from First Asia, right? And again, it took me around 5 to 6 months to just make my first ever sizable open source contributions. Now, outside of the contributions that I made, I started to then basically get involved in some of these programs as contributor, and then later on as a mentor. And as I built up my open source profile, I started to also then get some opportunities where I didn't actually apply myself. And that's what you can also expect to get if you are having, let's say, a very strong GitHub profile. That's something that you should basically work on. If you are willing to get into open source, your GitHub profile is extremely important, right? Because if you have a good GitHub profile, if you're let's say contributing to open source projects, then there are two different ways in which you can basically avail opportunities, right? Sometimes what happens is that let's say you're contributing to, and this is one of the examples is basically in my company, right? And I'll just quickly go to share one of these experiences. So one of my teammates, his name is Bruno. He basically started contributing in my company. It's an open source company, first of all, research. So he started to contribute during Hacktoberfest as a very active contributor. And immediately after Hacktoberfest ended, he got reached out by the company to apply for a job, right? And he got accepted, and he didn't have any formal rounds of interviews because the contributions that he made were so sizable that immediately got a job opportunity. And that's what open source can basically do for you, that if you are an active contributor, there are tons of companies, individuals who might look at your contributions and because see, normally if you're let's say making projects, or if you have a CV, right? Your CV might have a lot of good terms, and you might have made your CV very strong, but that doesn't give an immediate reflection of what type of work you're doing. But if you are having a very active GitHub profile, any recruiter or software engineer who might be hiring, they can directly see and see the kind of work that you're doing. And since your source code and your code that you're writing, contributions that you're making are public, they can immediately understand whether what's the skill that you have as a software engineer, and you can directly get reached out. And when I started actively contributing, I also got reached out for job opportunities. And again, I just woke up to random people, and whenever something that I never expected, to be able to just email me and say that, hey, like, we were impressed by your GitHub profile, we'd like to speak with you. And sometimes I got reached out by publications. So I'm a very active contributor to TensorFlow. So I got reached out by Pact, which is a online publication, to basically write a book on TensorFlow. So these kind of unexpected opportunities is also something that you will basically start to get. So of course, the opportunities for the first 30 minutes that we covered are some of the ones that you can apply for, but there are all of these innumerable opportunities that you can basically avail without even thinking about them, and might just randomly pop up, right? A lot of times, like, let's say if you're actively contributing to issues, right? Sometimes, like, let's say if it's a company who might be looking for a resolution of one of the problems that they're facing, and they see that one of the responses that you probably shared on these issues was really great, so again, they might reach out to you. It has happened with a few of my friends as well. So open source can, of course, the first few minutes where we covered about these opportunities, these are like direct opportunities that you can apply for. But personally, I feel that the more you contribute to open source, there are so many unexpected opportunities that can land in your way, right? You can attend these open source conferences, and let's say you have some meaningful discussions with the companies that are there, with the folks who are present at these conferences, right? They are some of the largest folks, most well-known folks in the entire ecosystem, and you might probably impress them with your skill set, and they might hire you directly. One of the opportunities that I got was at Open Source Summit in 2019, and at that time it took place in Paris, in Lyon, in France. And I basically, on the spot, I spoke with one of the sponsors, and I ended up getting a job internship opportunity in Paris. Again, it got cancelled because of COVID, but that's the idea, that you can basically get totally unexpected opportunities that might come your way if you are maintaining an active open source contribution, right? So what is the biggest takeaway, right? And like, basically what I'll suggest to everyone is, what is the biggest takeaway? The biggest takeaway is that again, it might take some time for you to basically get started with open source, and it's perfectly fine, right? It's perfectly fine if you are stuck somewhere, right? So I got stuck for 5 months to just make a single contribution. So again, depending on your skill set, again, it might take you time. So it's fine that if you don't get the right kind of opportunities and you get a lot of failures at the start, but if you are dedicated and if you put in the effort, then in no time you will also get opportunities that you probably might not have even thought about, right? And that's what has happened to me ever since I became a regular contributor, right? Whether it's job opportunities, whether it's opportunity to basically speak at a conference, and opportunity to travel across the world, and be able to share your journey and share your projects, or probably unexpected collaborations that people might want to have with you. Those are some of the things that you might not even realize that you start getting them automatically once you are really into open source. So basically the Azure developer community is also very active. Microsoft itself, in 1998 mentioned that open source cannot exist, but 20 years later they were the company which bought GitHub for billions of dollars. And today, Azure and a number of such kind of projects, they actually, if you look at Microsoft as a company, right, the Azure platform itself, they are one of the most active open source communities that are there. And you can take a look at a number of different projects that are there, ranging from Kubernetes, DevOps, to even IoT. So there are a number of different projects. And again, if you are a student, if you are let's say looking forward to contributing, then there are tons of such kind of projects that you can contribute to. And that the best part about open source is that it's not just about contributions, it's also about collaboration. So if you are new to tech, there are a number of different ways in which you can get mentorship support as well. And the best part about open source is that it's a very collaborative effort. So if you're stuck sometimes, or if you want guidance, there are tons of people around the world who are who will be ready to help you. So it's a very exciting field, right? Especially if you're a student, to basically get into it. And probably the next couple of minutes, I'll also want to focus on non-code open source contributions. So far, what we have focus is more on the tech side, code contributions. But there are a number of different things that you can basically do in case you're not interested in, like, let's say, directly into jumping into programming, right? There are a number of different programs, Google sort of documentation, docs, basically, and a number of other ways in which you can contribute to documentation as well. And then you can evangelize these open source projects. You can take part in events. You can basically, like, let's say, conduct events and meetups around these open source projects, and they are the way in which you are helping in a non-code fashion. So especially if you are a beginner and you're basically learning programming, or even if you're, like, let's say, not a programmer at all, you want to but you still want to be involved with open source projects, you can still do that. Become event manager, contribute to docs, become an advocate for these open source projects, and help evangelize these projects. And so there are tons of different ways that even if you are a marketer or if you are a business person, you can still be involved and work with open source programs and open source organizations. But of course, what we have learned is that open source is all about contributors coming together and working on these projects, and having that shared goal of being able to make software. And I mean, in general, the main idea of the open source philosophy, that whatever we build, anyone can use it, reuse it, and share it, and anyone can basically contribute to it. That's the main idea behind open source. So yeah, with that, I'll like to conclude my talk. And if you are interested, you can connect with me on my Twitter @howdevelop, and I'm open to questions now. I think, Nirmal, we can probably take up questions now. By the way, Prahlad asked, can you share your GitHub profile? It's there on the screen. So if you wish to connect with me, you can connect with me on Twitter. So if there are any questions, I'll love to answer any questions. So one of the questions that is by Harsh is how to get started with open source. So Harsh, primarily, the best way to get started is the first couple of things that you need to keep in mind is that before contributing to open source, there are a couple of things that you need to know. The first one is good knowledge about Git, because every open source project is primarily focused on Git. So learning Git, which is the version control system, because every open source project will use some kind of a distributed version control system. So the most popular one is Git. So definitely, definitely try to learn Git initially, and probably you can build your own open source projects and contribute with your friends in order to get more expertise and get more experience with Git. And then, of course, the next thing is learn one of the technologies, probably a programming language, and the surrounding tech stack. Again, you don't have to be a professional in that particular technology or that tech stack, and even if you're a beginner, you can still contribute, but just learn one of them, because every project that you contribute to, it will have one or more technologies that that particular project is based on. So once you are having this much knowledge, then you can get started with open source. You can basically get started by building your own open source projects, make a GitHub account, build your projects on GitHub, and then moreover, then you can start to look for open source programs, like all these different programs that we spoke about, and look out for projects yourself, collaborate with your friends, and take part in hackathons, right? And over there you can build open source projects, collaborate with others, and that way you learn both code and collaboration and community. So I hope that answers the question. And if there are any other questions, would love to answer them. All right. So the next question is about some tips. So this is the idea that we'll not focus on just one program. In general, like any open source program in which you want to become a contributor, right? The idea is the same. That primarily just look forward to first get started with the base of how to make open source contributions, that like Git and some programming language. Then either search for relevant projects where your skill set might be useful, or if you're really passionate about these projects, then use your first ideology of being able to learn the technologies that are part of that particular project, and start first by installing that project locally, understanding how that particular project basically works, and start with some of the smaller contributions, good first issues, getting started issues, and from there build up your base. And again, it might take you time, right, depending on the complexity of the project. Every project, some of the projects might be a bit easier, some of them are more complex, so it might take you some time, but spend time in contributing to that particular project and level up your contributions, right? And then that will help you to be more active in terms of like how to contribute to the project. But at the same time, all these programs do require, like they're not just looking out for the best programmers. What they also want is that the contributors who basically contribute to these open source projects, they also want really active community members, right? Members who help others to also get started with contributions in that particular community, and who are active, who can answer questions, right, who can help guide others as well. So stay active in these communities, right, in whatever respective way of communication that they have, and help others as well to get started with their journey in open source. And that will definitely help you to be able to get into programs, right? Any open source program for that matter. Any other questions? All right, looks like we don't have. But again, in case you have any further questions outside of this session, then feel free to reach out to me. Okay. The next question is a really important one, which is, what is the best open source license? So first of all, thank you so much for asking that question. Now, just to kind of first, in case you're not aware of what exactly is an open source license. So primarily, like when we talk about open source and free open source, right? It doesn't mean that you can just take any open source project and start misusing it. The license is a very important aspect of any open source project. It basically mentions that how individuals, in case you want to basically reuse a project, and if you want to, let's say, build on top of an open source project, how you can basically do that. Because what you don't want to do is that basically take an open source, like take an existing open source project that has been built by someone else, and then try to say that you are basically building it. What you have to ensure is that if you're using any open source projects in your project, then you acknowledge the people who have basically built that particular project, because they have spent a lot of time. So these licenses dictate the terms on how people can use the open source project, and they are primarily focused on to avoid any misuse of these projects that are there. And there are multitude different type of licenses. Some of the most common ones include the MIT license, Apache license, GNU license. So every license has some different terms. So depending on the project that you're building, my recommendation would be to go through so kind of just go through some of the most popular open source license, like the Apache, MIT, GNU license, and try to see that which particular license will work best with your project. Usually, I mean, they have similar content, but they might have some differences, right? So my personal recommendation will be to go through some of these the most common ones, and see which one basically best fits your program, your open source project. So I hope that answers your question, Savarna. And if there are any further questions, would love to take up.
Thanks a lot, Shivai, for such an amazing session. It was really great, and I can see the response is obviously amazing. Thanks a lot, and the points that you shared about GitHub, and especially you talked about so many other events as well, the
Yep.
opportunities that are available for students, and also at the same time they are for the professionals as well who wants to get started with all with open source and with a lot of things. So thanks a lot for the session, and with that note I want to say that yes, open source is the thing that you should contribute no matter what, that in which class, in which college, or like at what age you are currently in, because I have seen, and also Shiva, I have also come across with so many students who are like 12 years of old or 13 years of old and still they are contributing to open source. And also we have come across with the people who started their open source journey in their 30s as well. So we have amazing examples in front of us. We should just contribute to open source, and we should understand that how amazing it would be for us. So with that note, thanks a lot everyone for joining in. It was really great having you here, especially Shivai. And with that note, it's the end of our open source day. Thanks a lot. You can reach out to us anytime if you have any sort of doubt, and you can just join our Discord community. It's bit.ly/ is it Discord. And thanks a lot, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.